Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley. We're here to chat through Celtic's trip to Crvena Zvezda. That's how I'm pronouncing it. Red Star Belgrade to a lot of other people. Celtic are off to Belgrade this week for the start of their Europa League phase campaign. I've got Graeme McGarry here from the Herald joining us from Belgrade, and we'll get chatting to him in a moment. But first, a word from our sponsor. It's Simply Furniture. Located in Hillington, Glasgow, it's Simply Furniture is an independent brand dedicated to bringing luxury and contemporary style into homes across the UK. With over a decade of experience in furniture retail, they meticulously source only the finest pieces, curated for quality, comfort and timeless design. Their dedicated team ensures your furniture is delivered with care right to your doorstep. And if you want to see their range up close, you can visit their showroom, and if you mention the Celtic Way, you will get a special in-store discount. Now, Graeme, as I said, you're in Belgrade there. It's looking fine weather over there. You seem to be in a nice, luxurious Belgrade cafe. You're like a travel correspondent this morning.
Well, nice weather is subjective, John, because as a balding ginger guy, it's not really my cup of tea, I've got to be honest with you. But no, it's sweltering over here. It's really nice. It's around about 25, 26 degrees at the moment, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning over here. So it's to get to a high of 30 today, and it's to stay this way the whole time that we're here. So
yeah,
that might be an issue come match day, I don't know. But luckily, Stephen Crary hasn't played anymore, so it should be all right.
And given you're cowering under an umbrella, I take it that temperature is taking you a bit by surprise, Graeme.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it. I didn't do my research before I came, but yeah, it's listen, it's beautiful. Not a lot of Celtic fans kicking about as yet. There's a couple, one or two. There's one gentleman to my left here enjoying an Aperol Spritz, so an early start for the big man. But yeah,
lovely.
It's a lovely scene, and yeah, I think it's. I know a lot of Celtic fans aren't too excited about this game, just with everything that's going on in the background, but it's the start of a new campaign, and hopefully if Celtic can get a result, maybe that'll get people going again.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one. Like, I think Celtic fans have been so focused on the Champions League in recent years that the dropping into the Europa League was not good for anyone. There was obviously a massive reaction to it, a lot of unrest around it, and Brendan Rodgers wasn't happy himself. There was various stuff going on around behind the scenes. But I think the Europa League is also an opportunity for Celtic. Is that right enough to say? It feels like Celtic can get their teeth into this competition, especially if they get off to a good start. But Crvena Zvezda, Belgrade, they're a tough team here, and that might be difficult to get off to a good start because you look at their form of late, you look at their start in the domestically, and they seem to be a team in rich attacking form.
Yeah, I got a scout report off my taxi driver last night on the way in from the airport. It actually seems that, I know if you look on paper, I think, the start to the season that Red Star, as I'm going to call them, have had a really good start. They're scoring goals for fun. Obviously, top of the league by a couple of points with a game in hand. However, the situation that he described to me was very similar to the one that maybe Celtic are facing at the moment, in terms of their own disappointing exit from Champions League qualifying to Paphos, which I think everyone expected that Red Star were going to get through that tie. So the way he was talking last night and talking to a couple of guys around the hotel this morning, there's a bit of disgruntlement here with the team as well. So I'm not sensing a great deal of enthusiasm for the Europa League here either. But as you say, John, the Celtic players and the manager certainly seem to be viewing this as an opportunity now that the sort of sting of the Champions League has subsided somewhat. We spoke to Sebastian Tenetke after the game on Sunday, and he obviously has done well in this competition before with Bodo, and he was saying, there's a real chance here for Celtic, even in the sort of state of flux and everything that's going on in the background, with the quality that Celtic do have, albeit in their lopsided squad. I think there is a real opportunity here, and there's eight games there, where Celtic can really have a run at this tournament, and if they go off to a good start here, you never know. You can sense the enthusiasm might just come back again. But as you say, tough task, tough atmosphere, a team that's scoring for fun, but it's really difficult to gauge just where Red Star are and where Celtic are at this moment in time.
Yeah, the parallels to Celtic and Red Star are quite apparent for me. You know, I think they've won their league 10 out of the last 12 times or something like that. They've obviously won the European Cup in their history before. They seem like one of these teams around Europe. I mean, a lot of people talk about the lack of competitive in Scottish football, but this is we're seeing this in leagues across Europe, and I feel like Red Star fall into one of those categories where they want to do more in Europe off the back of pretty dominant domestic success, and the Champions League is where they want to be, and both teams dropping into this, I think they've got a bit of proof to both of their sets of supporters. Just on that league start that you mentioned there, what struck me is just the amount of goals they're scoring. So I think they've played 7 games and they've scored 30 goals and they've only conceded 5. And as you said, they've won all of them. They're a couple of points ahead of Partizan, who they beat at the weekend as well in a pretty tense derby. So that might be a bit of a concern for Celtic. You know, if Red Star score an early goal, this might be one that gets away from Celtic a little bit. We saw last year there's kind of two sides to Celtic in Europe. There's the Atalanta team, there's the Borussia Dortmund team, and I guess that might be a little bit of a concern for Brendan Rodgers going into this one.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the way that Brendan is going to approach this game in terms of his setup. We saw obviously after the Dortmund game last season, you know, there was a lot of people at that point were saying it's the same old Brendan, he can't adapt to European football, he plays too attacking, he can't play away from home in Europe. He did adapt, and it worked really well. You know, the Atalanta game that you mentioned, obviously a couple of games after that as well, where Celtic were a lot more solid. And I think I really wonder how he's going to set up in this, whether he maybe drops an extra midfielder back beside Callum McGregor for this one, and just try and be a bit more solid. Because as you say, particularly early on, I think Red Star will come flying out the blocks. And try and get that early goal and try and get the crowd on Celtic's back. If Celtic do lose an early goal, it could be a really long night. So I think Brendan will try and avoid that if possible and set up maybe a wee bit more conservatively to begin with, certainly.
Yeah, I think they started to get the balance right last year, and I mean that Dortmund game it just all seemed to be an avalanche of goals flying in from all angles that just seemed to pile up in the night. It was a weird game because but Dortmund were obviously dominant, but I'm not sure to that extent of that deluge of goals as we saw. So listen, I'm not trying to put the frighteners into any Celtic fans watching this, but I'm just saying, you know, Belgrade, Red Star, they're in pretty good attacking nick at the moment, and Celtic are going to need to be at the top of the game. I would suggest it probably needs to be Celtic's best performance of the season if they're going to get a result here, Graeme. I don't think that's unfair to say.
No, but it's difficult, John, because, you know, Red Star are not Borussia Dortmund. We have to be clear about that. You look at the standard in Serbia, you know, I'm not going to be a guy sitting in a glass house throwing stones here because in Scotland it's not great, but certainly you saw Partizan when they played Hibs in the summer, and Hibs came through that tie, and I think, you know, I don't think the standard here is, you know, anything like, you know, sort of Borussia Dortmund or anything like that. So there is that to take into account, certainly. Also, on the flip side of that, I don't think the Celtic team right now is the same standard as it was back then either, unfortunately. So it's been interesting, you know. I think the defensive setup, you know, Austin Trusty, I know he's got his critics, but he was immense over in that Atalanta game. He's obviously not here. So it'll be Liam Scales and Cameron Carter-Vickers that will start and centre back, I'm sure. At right back, you know, it's interesting. I think Kobe Donovan has done absolutely nothing wrong. I thought he was really impressive on Sunday, again with the caveat, with the greatest respect, it was Partick Thistle, but I think he looks strong, you know, really physically imposing as well. So I know Tony Ralston is back training today before the team fly out, but I'd be tempted to stick with Colby. I've got to be honest with you. I think he's done nothing wrong, and see how he handles getting into an atmosphere like this.
I said this as well, I think, on another video, that I would, you know, I'm a Celtic fan. From a Celtic fan's perspective, I think the Ralston in Europe story, you know what you're going to get from Anthony Ralston. I don't think there's going to be any surprises there, good or bad. You know, even if he has a solid night, you know, he's not going to hit a new rich form in Europe this season. And I think if you're testing out Colby Donovan, I think this is a pretty firm test for him to see how he handles this step up. And Brendan Rodgers has been very complimentary of him of late, Graeme. You know, he's talking about how he fights so much in training. He's talking about his personality a lot, as much as his ability. So it doesn't strike me that Brendan Rodgers will be scared to throw in Colby Donovan. I am actually expecting him to start on Wednesday night. Some people might say, you know, you go for the experience of Ralston. But just with the way Brendan Rodgers has been talking about Colby Donovan of late, it seems like a good match for him.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can't second guess Brendan. He may well think that because it's the first game and there's obviously going to be a raucous atmosphere, maybe Tony would be better for this night. But hey, listen, Anthony Ralston has never let Celtic down in terms of his effort, his commitment, and I think he's improved greatly as a player as well over the last couple of years. But for me, I think you're right, John. I think the way that Brendan's been speaking about Colby, the way that he pushed him forward to take that celebration on Sunday from the fans, I thought that was a brilliant moment for the kid. And Brendan really spoke warmly about him after the game. If I was a betting man, which I am, I would say 80% I'm sure that Donovan's going to start. And I think, from what I've seen from him so far, I think he's well equipped to handle it.
Now, Graeme, you've been around Brendan Rodgers quite a lot in press briefings over the summer. It's been a strange summer for Brendan Rodgers as much as anyone at Celtic. He's had a lot to say about various things. How did he strike you on Sunday? For me, he came across a lot more relaxed. At the moment, he seems pretty happy with now that he's got a firm task in mind. He knows what the lay of the land is. He seems to have found his motivation again. He doesn't seem beleaguered or he's not complaining as much. He cuts a pretty relaxed figure for me at the moment. Yeah,
I think he's made his point, John. He obviously was very unhappy with the summer business, as everyone was connected with Celtic, I think. But he realises he's an experienced coach, Brendan Rodgers. He realises now that there's no point in dragging this out any longer in terms of his public briefings. I was at the press conference where he called out the anonymous, in inverted commas, leak. And it was box office stuff and it was explosive. And I think the fans certainly are on his side when it comes to that argument. However, there is still a chance for Celtic to have a really good season this season, and it won't happen if the club's at war internally. So I think his focus now, until January at least, or probably until October when we start asking about transfers again, will now be on getting the most of what he has. And I think you can see, unless there's one or two injuries which could really cause some problems for Celtics, I don't think the depth is there, I think you can see there is just one or two wee signs that there's something to work with, and the team are kind of clicking back into gear. And I think Brendan will be now laser focused on just getting the best out of this team. He said it on numerous occasions. That's his job now, is to get the best out of the players that he does have, and see if they can get a good start to this campaign, good start to the domestic campaign, and just get through to January when, fingers crossed, there might be some additions coming in, but we know that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean, Rodgers does strike me as a guy who's desperate to talk about the football at the moment. There's a current running joke at the end of his press conferences where he tells the journalists the formation of the team because nobody's asked them about the opposition. So
I'm going to make a point of asking him about that tonight, just because it's the last twice he's done it to us. So, no, listen, I think he's very cognizant of the fan feeling, Brendan Rodgers. He feels it as well. He really wanted Celtic to kick on after the Champions League campaign last season, and it didn't happen. If you look at the Bayern Munich game, I've said this a couple of times now, the thing that Brendan Rodgers said immediately after that game, apart from being proud of his players, was that he didn't have the depth on the bench to really go for it in that last kind of 10-15 minutes, and that's what ultimately cost Celtic. I don't think he was asking for the world for Celtic to really try and strengthen that area so that he could have another go at it this season. But it's been done to death over the summer. We know the problems. He's made it clear that he's very unhappy with it. Now it's time to move on and hopefully get a wee bit of excitement going for this Europa League campaign, because, as we said before, there can be a really good season in Europe for Celtic. I know the enthusiasm's not there really with the fans now. They're probably not for the board going by their actions, but what I would say is, we all remember the campaigns of old when Celtic did have a good run in this tournament, and I think a couple of good results could really get the feel-good factor back again, hopefully.
You mentioned Tinekte kind of talking about how Celtic can have a deep run in this competition. He's a very confident character, Sebastian Tinekte. Immediately, you see it in the way that he plays the game, but even in some of his media appearances, his initial one and his veil-in, and even on Sunday, he strikes me as a guy who knows his ability and knows that what the opportunity he has at Celtic as well to progress his career. He just strikes me as very confident on and off the pitch at the moment.
Yeah, very impressive young man, I've got to say, and his dealings off the pitch just as much as he is on it. We spoke to him on Sunday after the game, and he's very level-headed. I don't think, he's only played a couple of games, so we do have to say, let's just try and keep a lid on it. But I don't think anyone could fail to be excited by what they've seen from him so far, and I think obviously a part of that is because the options were so poor, especially for the Kairat game. Going over there, that's no disrespect to the likes of James Forrest, who's been a wonderful servant to Celtic, but he can't go on the outside really so much anymore, given his advanced years. And I think that's what Celtic were crying out for, is just someone to get the ball and go at their man. And he is somebody who tries to do that every single time he has the ball. There's nothing really safe about what he does, and that's the type of Celtic winger that the fans love. And I think Rodgers said that himself on Sunday. He's of that old Celtic winger mould that gets bums off his seats, as the cliche goes. So I'm really excited to see what he brings, and I think he, more than anyone, is someone who's got Maduses kind of going again for this Europa League campaign, because I think he's somebody with a wee bit of an X factor, and I think you need that when you come to places like this.
Yeah, I think you do. You undoubtedly do. And listen, we're talking about Red Star's strength domestically. In Europe, their recent record hasn't been fantastic. They got 6 points in the same Champions League phase that Celtic were in last year. And listen, they lost 3 of their 4 home games, which it could be seen as a surprise. You think about going to Belgrade, it's really tough away trip, etc. But their home record actually hasn't been great of late. And even in the qualifiers this year, the Lech Poznan, they only drew 1-1 in their home leg, and they won 3-1 away. And they lost to Paphos 2-1 at home after a 1-1 first leg away from home. So their home record isn't the best in Europe, which might give Celtic fans some form of hope going into this. I think that's interesting to note, because I don't know about you, Graeme, but you think of Red Star, you think of an intense atmosphere, a really difficult away trip, but the recent results in Europe don't really seem to reflect that.
Yeah, one of the things my chief scout, the taxi driver, told me last night as well was that the atmosphere is great when things are going well. We've spoken about the effect that an early goal for Red Star could have on Celtic. I think the same is true the other way. I think if Celtic get a goal, or at least try and stay in the game in those early stages, the crowd can very quickly turn on them. I think it's a little bit like that whole Ibrox syndrome, I guess, where it becomes quite inhibiting for the home players when their own crowd really got on their back. So it's a tough crowd, as you say, for away teams, but equally it can be tough for Red Star if they don't get a good start. So yeah, I mean, again, it's a wee bit of a cliche, but Celtic do have to do that. They have to try and get the crowd on their backs and take advantage of the fact that we think our teams get stick over here for their own support, But yeah, it can be a bit tasty over here. So I'm hearing. So I think Celtic will look to do that.
There was a graphic going about on one of the social media sites where it was like the average sack-ins per season. And I think, we all talk about how managers aren't given enough time, but it got more and more intense as he went into Southeast Europe. It just became like managers just getting sacked left, right and centre every year. So I think the pressure is undoubtedly, it's a different realm sometimes in some of these countries. And I think Serbia is no different to that. So, yeah, you're totally right. I think a passionate support with expectations can be a real good factor, but it can be a hindrance as well. So if Celtic start this game well as well and frustrate the crowd and all that, kind of all those old cliches, then it could be a good night for Celtic as well. One concern that a lot of Celtic fans have, Graeme, is Celtic's midfield at the moment, and especially stepping up to a higher level. You've got Cal McGregor in there, Rio Tati and Benjamin Nigren have been getting starts of late. Is there a sneaking suspicion Arne Engels might come back in for this one? I know you mentioned Austin Trusty last year in terms of the Champions League, performed a lot. Arne Engels also started the vast majority of those Champions League games. He also started at Ibrox. So could Engels come back in for this one?
I would have Arne Engels back in the lineup if it was the Arne Engels that played in the Champions League last season. I think his best performances for Celtic so far came in the Champions League, especially away from home. Last season, I thought he was fantastic in the Bayern game. I think that's probably his best game in a Celtic jersey. He didn't look out of place at all. Unfortunately, you mentioned the game at Ibrox. I don't think he did much of anything in that game. I thought he looked a little bit lost, to be honest with you, even physically, which is one of his better attributes, you would think. I did think he got overrun a little bit, and if anything, he looked a wee bit overawed even by the game. So that was a concern, but I do totally appreciate that school of thought. I would, obviously the right side's a problem for Celtic at the moment as well. Benjamin Nigren playing there in the Kairat game, I don't think that really worked, to be honest with you. I didn't really like that. But what else do you do? You know, do you put Dyson Maeda over there, who I think previously hasn't looked great on the right-hand side as well? I don't know. But, I mean, for me, if you can get Arne Engels into the midfield and he's going to be playing at his full capacity, then, yeah, I would like to see that, because there is a real danger here. As much as I'm a huge admirer of Callum McGregor and Rio Hatate, and even I think Nygren's had a good start, I think there's a danger they go overrun in there physically, unless you get Arne Engels in with his athleticism. So, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, that. But again, the knock-on effect is, what do you do on the right-hand side? You know, it's a couple of big questions for Brendan there.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to this point of, like, Celtic, you know, Brendan Rodgers talked about this on Sunday as well. It's just like, it almost is like Celtic are starting again to an extent, which isn't where they should be after last year in the summer, but it's the reality of where they are, and Brendan's kind of like trying to build up again, I suppose, with Iheanacho coming in, kind of changing the attack, and Tenecti coming in, changing the attack. I'm going to bring in some comments from the viewers here. Robert Gibson, rather poetically saying, the Europa League is equivalent of a black and white TV in a colour world. And that's the kind of comment we'll have. John Clement saying, Brendan looks happier because the window is shut right up until the last hour. He didn't know what players he would have to work with, and that's part of the disgrace. Big Dom, not very confident. We will get hammered out of this competition because we have very little quality up front. And John McGrothy kind of backing that up. And I'm not picking these out, folks. This is just the sentiment I'm seeing in the chat today. John McGrothy saying, what a difference a couple of weeks makes. If you think Celtic will get anywhere with this squad, you're kidding yourselves on 2 years ago, maybe. Jerry Smith, a little bit more optimistic. He's saying, it's Europe, let's have a go. And Thomas Muirhead saying, let's not forget we are weaker as a team than last season and are carrying too many passengers now. I'm dreading the game tomorrow. Listen, Graeme, I think there is a fair amount of negativity around this, and I guess it's ultimately up to Celtic to prove that they are capable of attacking this competition. I think I've looked at some of the ticket sales for the Braga game next week. It's not particularly inspiring. It doesn't seem like Celtic fans are selling that out anytime soon. So it just, I think there is a lot for this team to prove. As I said, it's a team kind of rebuilding again, which is a little bit absurd given the strength of Celtic's position going into the summer, but that's the reality of where we are. Yeah,
I don't think it falls on the players. You know, none of this has anything to do with the guys who are there at the moment. I can completely see where the guys are coming from there in their comments. You know, like the summer was, it almost beggared belief covering it. You know, and this is maybe the 10th summer that I've sat and watched this. You know, I remember years ago I was in Athens when Celtic had the qualifier. I think 2017, 2018, and Dedrick Boyata, didn't travel, and they were left with, you know, Jack Henry and Chris Ayer at the time, who was mainly right back at that point, playing a centre half, and they get put out the competition. And some of the things that Brendan said that night were exactly the same things he was saying, you know, this summer, which was incredible to see. You'd think they'd learned a lesson on that. So I can completely understand why Celtic fans think they've seen this movie before, and it's always going to be this way. But they are where they are, and you know they have to really. I think you saw it on Sunday. The protests aren't about the team. You know, the fans were brilliant in their backing of the team on Sunday, and I think the actual starting 11 isn't all that bad. I think Iheanacho's a wee bit further on than what I thought he was going to be. You know, I thought he was going to come in and maybe be a wee bit porky and take a wee bit of time to get up to speed.
Yeah, like Iheanacho, like, as a man who, as a Celtic fan, was very unhappy with that signing 10 minutes after it started and said so on video. Like, I was like looking at the game on Sunday and thinking, listen, I probably needed to calm down a little bit on that signing, because I think he looks pretty sharp. Just what I would say is, like, his distribution, the way he's passing the ball and combining with teammates was ahead of where Adam Ida was. We know Adam Ida can bang in 20 goals a season maybe, but we'll see if Iheanacho can match that. But just in terms of his overall play, again, it's one game against Partick Thistle, but it just seemed to me like he had a better touch, or he had a better awareness of his teammates too.
Yeah, I think the link up with Tenecti for the third goal was really encouraging. It was something that Brendan Rodgers spoke about after the game, and Sebastian spoke about it as well, actually, that he feels as if he's got a good understanding with them already. I don't think the criticism of the Iheanacho signing wasn't about Kelechi Iheanacho per se. You know, like, I know obviously it's a few barren years. It was the fact that on transfer deadline night, there was this image conjured of Brendan Rodgers sitting in Lennoxtown at 10 to 12, flicking through his little black book trying to get some signings, you know. There was just no strategy behind it, and I think that's where the sort of ill feeling came from. The player himself, we all know he's got quality. We know he's got pedigree. And Brendan was the one, probably the last manager that got that kind of level out of him. So the great hope is that he can do that again here. And I think, you can't deny he's got quality. Whether he's up to speed enough to deal with it this kind of game, I don't know. But I would have him in from the start Wednesday night, absolutely.
Yeah, the chaos at the end of the transfer window was someone else. I mean, as you know, we have a paper deadline, and our sports editor had asked me to write something about Celtic's transfer deadline day, but their deadline is 10:30, and obviously the window shut at 11, and people are asking, well, what's going on at Celtic? Can we submit anything? And I'm like, I don't think even Celtic know, so how are we supposed to know, kind of thing. And that's just one of those kind of slight absurdities of covering Celtic in this situation as well. And listen, you're covering Celtic for us out there at the moment. You're going to be on the Celtic Way quite a few times over the next few days on videos, etc., including tonight. You're speaking to Brendan Rodgers this evening at the stadium, and we will have a live show after that to chat about what Brendan Rodgers has said, and we'll be doing a live blog on the website as well, everyone, so check that out. What we're expecting from Brendan Rodgers tonight is just a man totally focused on the football and the task ahead. Yeah,
absolutely. I think he'll carry on in the same kind of calm manner that he sort of exuded on Sunday. I don't think he's going to... all the bombast is out the way, the line's drawn under it, and that's that. So it'll all be about the football tonight. As you say, a couple of interesting questions for him in terms of how he's going to set up. I think he will speak about that experience from last year in terms of the Champions League and going away from home and just being that little bit more hard to beat. I think that's going to be something he'll discuss. And we'll try and press him on his personnel. He won't give too much away, I don't think. No. But certainly, one thing you might be able to get out of him is what he thinks about Colby. Donovan starting at right back. I think that's something that we might be able to shake out of him, hopefully. But yeah, I'm expecting him to be quite optimistic. I think he's going to give... He's had his piece on. He'd rather be in the Champions League. He doesn't want to be here any more than any other Celtic fan does. But now that he's here, he's going to try and make the most of it. And I think he's going to be giving out positive messages tonight.
Look, and again, we've talked about the fan perception of this. On a personal basis, I think there's an opportunity for Celtic here. Like, I wouldn't particularly say I'm excited about the Europa League. I don't know if that's the right characterisation for it, but I am intrigued about what Celtic can do in this competition. And I enjoy Celtic butting heads against different types of teams. And actually, that's one of the benefits of the new format, Graeme, is that you play 8 different teams. It's not just 4 teams home and away. You get a different vibe. It's just a different dynamic to Champions League and the Europa League. You play different styles of teams. You visit different places. All of that is more interesting than not being in it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I can get the concern that maybe people don't think the squad depth is there to compete on both fronts. If Celtic want to have a good domestic season and a good European season, at the moment you've got to say, as I touched on earlier, a couple of injuries and you're really kind of down to bare bones again in that Kairat front line that we saw. So minus Adam Media, of course. So yeah, I can understand that. But as you say, I do think that now that Celtic are in the Europa League, there's got to be an acceptance of where they are. The realism is that it probably is where Celtic are at the moment in terms of the strength of the squad. The flip side, obviously, is if Celtic then struggle in the Europa League with this team, that's just going to add to the doom and gloom. I think they do really need to get off to a decent start if they're going to sell a few more tickets for Braga. I do understand that, obviously, as part of a protest as well. A lot of fans are withholding their money through a point of principle, and I completely understand that and get that. But I do think as the tournament goes on, if Celtic can start well here, get a result against Braga, then I don't think you'll see as many empty seats, hopefully, as the tournament moves on.
Well, Graeme, we'll let you go and get more scouting reports off the taxi driver. That is a classic. That's a classic European trip. The taxi
I'm going for sun cream. That's what I'm going for. Factor 50 is what I'm going for.
Listen, I hope you enjoyed the trip out there. As I say, we'll be speaking to Graeme this evening from the stadium, just about the press conference and what Brendan Rodgers has had to say, and he'll be providing coverage for us while he is across over there. It looks great weather, Graeme. It's a trip to be savoured to an extent, so I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that, from my perspective, I hope Celtic win. I hope Celtic get a good result on this trip and kind of lay down a marker in this Europa League, but that is to be seen. Any final thoughts before we let you go, Graeme?
No, just a nice lolly and a nice bit of sun cream. That's next on the agenda before I head up to the stadium. So the stadium's about 1 kilometre out of town, so I was going to walk it, but I might revisit that plan.
And listen, if anyone's in Belgrade watching this and you've got some spare sunscreen for Graeme, just flag him down and give him that. That would be a good thing for them. And listen, appreciate you joining us, Graeme. Appreciate everyone in the live chat joining us. Join us in the comments below. Let us know what you think about Wednesday night's game. And we'll see you next time on The Celtic Way.